Welcome to the Skills World Live radio show, sponsored by OneFile, a world where everyone is learning for their future. Stay tuned for all the news, views and interviews in association with FE News.
Hello, I'm Tom Bewick. Welcome to this very special conference edition of Skills World Live. This week we're in Liverpool with the Labour Party crowd who are meeting here for the first time since 2018. Labour's leader Keir Starmer has just finished his big conference speech in which he's promised over 1 million more skilled jobs as part of a British clean energy revolution. With the party currently 17 points ahead in the opinion polls, it's fair to say the optimistic mood here amongst delegates is one of wanting to put behind them more than 12 long years in the political wilderness. One way that will be achieved, the Labour leader told us today, is through investment in the workforce, in skills, training and ensuring that we not only buy more British, but we have the right skills to make more and export more goods and services in the future. After all, that's how any country has to pay its way in the modern world. In today's programme, we're getting stuck into this great skills debate by discussing what a future Labour government can actually do to improve skills, FE, tertiary education in this country. And joining me on my super informed panel today, we're delighted to have back a Skills World Live regular in Toby, Perkins MP, the Labour Member of Parliament for Chesterfield, and of course the Shadow Further Education and Skills Minister. Sitting next to him, from the awarding body world, we have Katie Orr. Training Qualifications UK is one of the leading regulated awarded organisations, also offering endpoint assessments in apprenticeship. And ensuring that we have a proper journalist on the panel today, it's a real pleasure to introduce Sonia Sodha, the chief leader writer at The Observer, a big supporter actually of FE and a regular pundit on our TV screens. Finally, our super informed panel is completed by Alan Woods, OBE. Alan is wearing at least two hats today in his day job as Chief Executive of the Vocational Training Charitable Trust, or VTCT, and his other job, which is trying to keep me under control, as the co-chair of the Federation of Awarding Bodies. Right, well, we're joined by our three members. Toby, it's over to you to give us a little 3-minute peroration as to what a future Labour government would do for skills.
Okay, well, thanks ever so much, Tom. It's great to be with you again. I think that from our perspective, ensuring that our country makes the most of everyone's talents and ensures that workers, students and employers are able to get the skills they need is a matter of both national and moral importance. I think all of us realise that employers have never found it so difficult to attract the workers that they need. Staffing shortages just seem to be a part of the daily lexicon of our lives, whether you're waiting for a hospital appointment, trying to get a new kitchen fitted or book a table at a restaurant. Everyone seems to be suffering from staffing shortages right now. But alongside the economic imperative to ensure that every worker is able to fulfil their potential, I think as the party of working people, the Labour Party feel that we also have a moral responsibility to deliver a skills agenda that allows workers to extract the maximum returns for their labours. Now, in terms of the specific issues that are facing, as you referred there to some of the things that Keir Starmer's been talking about this week, of course, he's also been talking about reform of the apprenticeship levy and looking for the apprenticeship levy, which I think is widely accepted as failing, to turn into a skills and growth levy that will be focused, of course, on apprenticeships, but also more flexibly used for levy payers. I think it's important to stress within that we see the role of SME apprenticeships as remaining absolutely crucial. In fact, we'd like to see far more small businesses being empowered to offer apprenticeships. But that flexibility is going to be there. We'll probably get into within discussions a bit more of the opportunities that will be offered as a result of the greater flexibility within that levy. But we see that as a real primary responsibility. We also see the need for the levy to be focused on entrance to the labour market. I think too much of the levy has been focused around sort of level 6 and 7 MBA kind of qualifications, and that's never what the levy was originally envisaged for. And I think we also see careers guidance, work experience, and seeing the focus and desire for skills to be an absolutely central part of people's learning journey right the way through from being at school into later life, and that be on a pathway of lifelong learning. So there's a great deal else that I think we can talk about and pick up within the debate. But I think the kind of key focus for a future Labour government, maintaining apprenticeships as the gold standard, having an apprenticeship levy that actually does the job that is required of it, and having a skills policy that brings together further education, higher education, collaboratively working together rather than in competition with each other, that listens to the voice of employers, but makes sure that the voice of learners is also heard, which I think we haven't heard enough about in recent times, and a focus on devolution of that policy so that it's delivered where there is local decision making also.
Okay, thanks Toby, thanks for staying to time as well. Over to this side of the table, Alan, give us your peroration.
Well, I think when I first started my working career, I was a paramedic, but I don't think you actually need to be a paramedic to diagnose that we're in a pretty sick system at the moment with regarding skills and productivity. In particular, low pay is an issue with insecure jobs. I think we've got low productivity. I think we're 15% behind France and Germany. And we also have low skills and also low levels of literacy, which I think are a real kind of break on people learning new skills. 7 million adults, I think, are in some form of literacy, poor literacy skills. We've had the pandemic, which has also shown that our digital literacy, I think, is something which we need to focus much more on. Recently as the chair of governor at Walsall College, we had returned laptops, because people didn't actually know how to use the laptop. You could see that they weren't actually being used. I think we also need some stability and trust being put back into the system. It seems to me that as Toby was saying, that there's a lot of focus on the sizzle, the level 6, 7 type end of the qualification market, but not so much on the sausage, not so much at the entry level, level 1, level 2. So I think there needs to be a refocusing on that part of the system. And what we can't do, of course, is build the pyramid of skills from the middle upwards. You have to get that entry level right so that people can progress into better paid jobs and have a direct line of sight to work. And I think the bits about trying to make lifelong learning available to all people is going to be a really critical point, and so that we have skills that are available across the country wherever people want to learn those skills. It is not good enough that in Walsall, for example, we can't actually engage staff to teach plumbing because we can't pay them enough to actually do the transfer of those skills. And we should be opening up things like National Skills Fund and the Lifelong Learning Entitlement, again, so that it's available to everybody who wishes to retrain or to learn new skills, not just those that haven't got level 3 qualifications or wanting to do level 4 to 6 qualifications with the Lifelong Learning Entitlement. I think we've got some challenges in closing the attainment gap. We know that there is this divide between the north and south, and we've just got to get that right first time, because the more that we get it wrong at the very beginning, the worse that attainment gap gets for learners across their educational experience. And finally, I do welcome the flexibility that the Labour Party's announced potentially that they would introduce if they were to get into government. It cannot be right that £1 billion goes back to the Treasury each year, and it cannot be right that since 2010 there's been a 40% less apprenticeship starts from young people aged 16 to 25, and I think some of the reforms that you've announced today will certainly go a long way to making that a historic figure, hopefully.
Thanks for that, Alan. I'm sure in the second part of the discussion, I think we're going to want to look more about how does the actual sector of further education, colleges, providers and skills actually respond to some of the kind of macroeconomic challenges. But I think for the moment, we're still going to focus a bit on some of the big macro economic challenges of the sort actually that Keir Starmer, as Leader of the Opposition, has also touched on in his speech today, which is, we've got a government that has decided to borrow more money in order to deliver tax cuts, with the belief, because this hasn't happened yet, that it will stimulate growth. It's about £220 billion of stimulus. that's going to be put into the British economy, principally through tax cuts, but also the energy price cap. So Sonia, over to you. I mean, you'll certainly, as chief leader writer at the Observer, you're going to have to come to some sort of line, aren't you? You've heard Labour this week. We know what the Tories have just announced in terms of the mini budget, as it's called. Where does skills and productivity fit into that picture?
Well, I'm very, very sceptical about the claims that Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have made about their predictions about what their package is going to mean for growth. I think no country in the world has created a growth pathway through cutting taxes for the wealthy, which is basically what this government has done. And I think it's really an article of faith for them. It's I would almost go so far as to call it quack economics, actually. What we really know we need to address is there's some key things, long-term structural issues in the economy that we need to address. The sustainability of our energy market is obviously one of them. The housing market is another, and then related to the housing market is our productivity crisis. And I think you can't get away from the fact that you don't get growth without greater productivity. There's no evidence that, personal income taxes for the wealthiest increase productivity. We've had the slowest productivity growth, I think the second slowest in the G7 since the global financial crisis, and we are not going to get better growth unless we find something to do, unless we figure out what to do about that. For me, skills it's not the only answer, but it's got to be absolutely, it's part of the answer, and it has to be. So if you're a government that's serious about growth and you've not got something really big and important and big picture to say about skills policy, it really calls into question what you're doing. In terms of, I guess my role as a journalist is really to zoom out, and I'll use this first bit to sort of say what I think the issues are and what I would be looking for from Labour as a potential party of government. So I completely agree with Alan, first of all, on the attainment gap and the fact that we've got too many young people leaving school, leaving compulsory education without the basics, let alone higher skills. They don't have the functional literacy and numeracy that you need to have a flourishing, fulfilled personal life, but also what you need for your employment opportunities. And we've never really cracked that as a country. It's internationally high, and that's absolutely something that I think Labour needs to prioritise. What are we doing for young people leaving school at 18 without those skills? So I'd like to see something on that. One of the things I've written about is the huge gap in investment between young people who go to university and young people who don't go to university. Now, I happen to think people who go to university get a pretty raw deal at the moment as well, but they get a better raw deal than the young people who don't go to university. And so we invest, the figure sort of changes, obviously, depending on the loan system and how much of it actually gets paid back their forecast. But the Institute for Fiscal Studies has estimated that, we spend anything between £25,000 to £30,000 on young people who go to university on average over the course of a 3 to 4 year degree. That's right. Why aren't we spending that money on young people who don't go to university? I think it's one of the biggest social injustices in our system, actually, in our skills system. It's not fair, it's not right. If anything, we should be spending more on the young people who don't go to university than the young people who do. My sort of philosophy is you want to be spending a lot on the kids who don't leave school with basic skills, for example. So I would like to see Labour pledge to level the playing field, whether it doesn't matter what pathway young people take post 18, we value all of them and we invest in all of them for their skills. So that's something I'd like to see. I think we've really got to get lifelong learning right as well. I think we've got a shockingly bad system of lifelong learning in this country. It's impenetrable, it's really hard to retrain. We're living in an economy where, just as in the 80s, jobs are going, some jobs just aren't going to exist anymore. We see that in the dispute over trains and the train strikes. I've got so much sympathy for people who are striking because they're being told, we don't need conductors on trains anymore. We don't need people to check the doors are shut. Okay, we've got, the technology for that. And of course they're going on strike because what retraining offer is there for people? What skills offer is there? So, in a world where certain jobs are going to continue to die away and new jobs are coming on stream, and we don't know the future, we can't predict what's coming 30 years down the line, you've got to have a good provision for people to retrain. And then finally, The university system, I think, does need a lot of reform in terms of what it gives young people, and I've written quite a lot about it. I personally think our very academically stratified university system, there's no reason for it apart from that's the way that we've always done it, and I think it really shores up class privilege, the fact that if you get 3 A's, you might go to one university. If you get 2 A's and a B, that's another university altogether. And if you get 3 B's, another university. Why can't those 3 young people study history together? It's bonkers. It happens in our school system. And I think, I think what that stratification does, there's no academic purpose of it, but what it does is it sends very strong signals to employers and it compounds social disadvantage. So I personally would be quite radical on that. I think that's maybe quite a difficult electoral sell, but it would be interesting to see some thinking from Labour on that.
Indeed. I also have a whole podcast just talking about comprehensive universities. I mean,
yes,
that would be a very
honestly, yeah,
policy,
yeah.
But,
well, I've written a column in support of it, and I have to say, my background is policy wonkery, and I've read a lot of policy pamphlets in my time. The pamphlet that made the case of comprehensive universities, it was a HEPI pamphlet. It was by Tim, I've forgotten his second name now, but I've actually never read a policy pamphlet that made me think so much and and question assumptions that I've had about policy so deeply, because I was like, why on earth do we do the university system in the way that we do it? There's no good reason for it. And so I would recommend anyone who hasn't read that pamphlet, even if you disagree with the idea, read it, because it will make you think about it differently.
Okay, well, you heard it here first. Higher Education Policy Institute, go and read about comprehensive universities. Katie, world of awarding organisations and the contribution that they can make to this bigger debate about productivity and skills performance. What's your perspective?
Thanks, Tom. So I can't pretend to be an economist or
you don't have to be. We didn't invite you on that basis.
My expertise does lie very focused on the skills area, but it's interesting to hear Alan and Sonia speak about that entry level and those foundation skills and the requirement to up our attainment levels at the very low levels before we start focusing on the higher levels of education. It's something that at TQK we identified that we wanted to be a part of, and we've invested quite heavily in our development of functional skills, essential digital skills, qualifications as those reforms have come through. But what we have an opportunity to do here is combine a retraining strategy for the likes of people that Sonia's referenced there, the people who are striking, who are being told your jobs are at risk, there's not opportunities for you, we're not being presented with other opportunities, with a business rebuilding programme for small businesses. We're in a situation here where we're seeing increasing numbers of small businesses and now even medium businesses going out of business because they can't get the staff that they need, or they can't afford to operate because their productivity is not where it should be, or they're not able to operate efficiently because of a lack of skills in those areas. So it seems like we've got two problems there that could solve one another. And if we focus our retraining efforts for those who are at risk of redundancy or who are already unemployed in areas where businesses need to start rebuilding themselves and have skills to enable them to do that, we may be able to kill a couple of birds with one stone. But I haven't seen anything really of that joined up thinking in the most recent announcements from our current government. Skills seems to have taken a bit more of a backseat in the manifesto, and all the eggs are in the tax cutting basket, which as I say, I'm not an economist, so I wouldn't care to make a prediction about how successful that will be, but from a layman's perspective, it doesn't seem to add up.
Katie, you really don't have to be an economist. We didn't invite you on that basis. We've got plenty of economic viewpoints around the table. Thanks all of you for that opening gambit in terms of how, as a UK economy, we improve our skills and productivity performance. What really struck me actually about those contributions is, and your metaphor, Alan, about the sick patient, having obviously previously in a past life been a paramedic, and it was echoed, I think, in something that Sonia Sodha said as well, about this realisation after sort of 3 or 4 decades of a British economy where up until the financial crash we were kind of around about trend rate of growth, if you were being an economist, about 2.5% or just below that. And then we have this financial crash, and then what we see in terms of, certainly in terms of productivity growth, and you touched on this, Sonia, about the G7, and we are second from bottom, Italy I think being in last place of our international competitors. So since the financial crash, we've had productivity output per worker growth of about 0.7%. on average. So we're way, way behind that trend rate of growth. And why do any of these figures matter at the end of the day? Well, quite simply, if we as a nation cannot be better skilled, higher skilled, more productive, we can't sell our wares both internally and overseas. We can't give those international investors necessarily the confidence in this economy to pay its way in the world. And that's not necessarily a Tory Chancellor idea. I mean, back in 1963 in Scarborough, when Harold Wilson famously gave his White Heat of Technology speech, he majored completely on this issue of Britain's got to be able to pay its way in the world. It's just that his prescription for that was to invest in education and science. So it feels almost in a way we're a bit full circle here with now, after 12 years of opposition of Labour out of power, we've got a leader of the opposition, you and your front bench colleagues, in a sense promising a reboot of the British economy, the fairer Green Deal and revolution. But Toby, just picking up on something you said, because actually I think there's agreement on how sick the patient is and what's caused it. And Sonia, I think you were good at sort of saying that it's not just about skills, it's about housing, it's about energy insecurity, and there's other things. But from what you said, I didn't particularly pick up a great deal of difference between you and the current Conservative government in terms of what you would actually prescribe going forward with the skills system, apart from flexibility around the levy, obviously the investment in the Green Deal, which potentially is going to create more jobs, but the Conservatives are saying that as well as part of the National Skills Fund. I mean, help me out here. What is actually really different from what the Conservatives are offering?
Yeah, I think firstly, the levy reforms are very significant difference. I think that secondly, in terms of where they are on qualifications, there's a real sort of driving focus of this government towards T-levels, decrying BTECs, and I think that leads to very damaging social mobility considerations. So I think that our approach would be very different to that. We're not hostile to T-levels, but we do think that they are evolving qualification. There's much still to discover. I suspect they will end up looking very different to how they do now anyway. And whilst they are emerging, it's an absolute folly to be getting rid of BTEC. So I think that would be very different. I think a focus around lifelong learning. I think adult education under this government has been, the area sort of further education has been hit most out of all of education. Adult education has been hit most out of the further education part. So I think that that sort of approach would be entirely different. And I think more generally, this government's sort of principle is that employers should be in the driving seat, and that is the sort of all of their reforms lead to that principle. Whereas we believe that learners also, their voice is also important. Yeah. It shouldn't just be, I have a job and I'm willing to train you to do it. It should be a recognition of the role of learners in that, particularly at a time when we have such massive skills shortages, staff shortages, but also that collaborative approach, a strategic approach, fitting in. I don't think this government has an industrial strategy. Labour government will, as Johnny Reynolds.
Indeed, and it sees that probably as the responsibility of a different department, and now we have obviously skills as part of the Department for Education. But coming back to the last Labour government, when it left office in 2010, was spending on average £750 million a year more in further education, including policies like the educational maintenance allowance, which Sonia touched on your point about widening participation and giving people second chance education. I suppose for voters looking at this podcast, thinking about who to choose at the next general election, Keir Starmer said Labour's on their side, on the side of working people. But do you envisage a future Labour government restoring that level of investment that we know has been underfunded chronically by a Conservative government in FE?
Yeah, from my perspective as the Shadow Skills Minister, obviously hoping to be Skills Minister, I very strongly make that argument. I think everything that we've heard from Keir Starmer in his last two conference speeches makes it clear that he sees this as a real priority. Now, as he also said today, government is making some extraordinary choices which could make the economic picture incredibly difficult for a future Labour government. And he was at pains to say today we aren't going to be able to do all the things we would like to do. But I think that there is, the issue of student poverty and the impact that that has on aspirations is an incredibly important one. I think education maintenance allowance was a huge mistake to get rid of that. Whether you would advocate just recreating it in exactly the same form, or whether you would aim to target it a little bit more. I think it also touches upon the issue around qualifications, because T-levels particularly are a very full-time qualification. And I think many students in more deprived communities, when they get to 16, 17, their families expect them to be contributing financially. And that's much more easy to do with BTECs than T-levels. So I think the whole, I think that more broadly, we don't really have a system now. What we have is a huge number of different initiatives, but there is no pathway, there is no coordinated approach that sort of welds these things together. And I think that's where we would look to see the systematic role of skills within our economy, within our industrial strategy, being very different to the sort of piecemeal approach we're getting currently under this government.
Yeah, well, we certainly have a very large Department of Education these days. Just 10 years ago it employed 10,000 people, it now employs 20,000 people. This is at the centre in Whitehall, and of course it devises lots of products and services like T-levels and others, which we'll come on to in the second half. But Sonia, I mean, in terms of the post-18 then choices, is the answer to just take that £20 billion as a country that we're spending on further education and higher education, and look to rebalance then that money more towards those that don't get a higher education? I mean, is one way of looking at devolution, rather than just going from one set of bureaucrats in Whitehall to potentially another set in the regions of England, to just give that money through an entitlement-based approach to every 18-year-old in the country?
So I would, rather than a rebalancing, I would sort of think of it as a levelling up. So I wouldn't take away from the young people who are at university. I would spend more on those that don't. And obviously, there's finite pots of sums of money out there, but I think skills is really critical and really key, and I think it's something the government should be prioritising. So I would see it as probably more like a doubling of what we spend on post-18 education, rather than let's spread what we've got out more thinly between more young people. I think in terms of the policy mechanisms, I think, yes, you could do it as an entitlement. I mean, that's sort of the way I think about it, like every young person should get the same level of investment because we care about them all the same. Obviously, there's going to be courses like medicine which are more expensive, but I don't think it necessarily has to be actually like a pot of cash that you give somebody. And actually there have been...
Why is that? Because that sounds a bit Thatcherite, voucher.
No, it's not. It's not necessarily that. It's that actually the Labour government tried individual learning accounts. To be honest, I think the technology's a bit different now, and you might be able to do it better. Yeah, exactly. You might be able to do it better. But I mean, there was a lot of fraud, and there were people setting up as learning providers in order to get this cash, basically. So I think to me, the funding mechanism matters less than the quality of what's on offer. That's really key. And I think it's thinking about what do young people who don't go to university need from more vocational system of education. I think apprenticeships have got a huge amount to offer. But I also think we need to think about a world where actually sometimes I think the skills that young people are developing, the most important skills in a very fast-changing workplace, obviously not for every job, but for many jobs, are transferable skills. So, and you get a lot of transferable skills going to university. You get a lot of social skills, and we expect young people who don't go to
cultural networks.
We expect young people who don't go to university to sort of basically, they don't get that sort of passage into adulthood that's kind of facilitated by the state. They don't get that move away from home if they are moving away from home. So I think we need to think about, what would we do and what do we offer that is about that sort of social transition, about transferable skills, as well as some of the specific vocational skills you may be looking to develop doing an apprenticeship too. And I don't know what that system looks like, but I think we've got to get really creative and think outside the box, because we've never really taken a step back and put that level of thought into it. And for example, I used to be a trustee of a charity called City Year that sort of places young people to do a year of what they call community service in schools in disadvantaged areas, to be be near peer mentors to young people. And those young people, they get a lot of transferable skills from doing something like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an apprenticeship, but I just think it's important that we're thinking about how we're developing young people as people. And that whether or not they go to university. So maybe it's something innovative like that, who knows?
Yeah, think outside the box. Alan, we're used to hearing about Oxbridge, and of course you look back through history, people who've done politics, philosophy and economics actually end up in the cabinet under both Labour and Conservative governments. You can see that in terms of the social mix. Voxbridge, new idea, the idea of a sort of Oxbridge of technical vocational education. What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, well, that came out from the Prime Minister, didn't it, on her hustings trail. I'm not sure what that is actually setting out to solve as a response to the policy challenge that we've just kind of gone through as a panel. To me, it doesn't enable everybody to participate in the valued work that everybody needs to have both social and individual value. And I really concur with what Toby was saying about, the learner is so important in this. And we've had this debate about employers running the system. But the learner, and a lot of learners become self-employed. So it seems to me that we need to trust people to make decisions for themselves and what skills they wish to learn and what jobs and occupations they want to go into. It isn't always good that these are decided by faceless bureaucrats or people even in combined authorities saying what's good for the region. There is something about the individual having the right to a fulfilled life with well-paid jobs, and that interventions that we have to make in the skills area and the education area are right from the very earliest stages. Just a few points of difference in people's attainment at GCSE would make a huge contribution to the productivity of the UK. But if we've had, I think, over 20 interventions for young people who, or early years anyway, that they can't actually then participate fully because they just haven't got these skills that enable them to get on in life. And if we're then asking further education colleges, who by the way deliver HE, that's another forgotten part of the work of FE colleges, that they actually are an HE provider. But if we only give them £450 to make up for all the maths and English that the state education system can't actually deliver, for whatever reason, whether they're free school meals or they've got special education needs, we can't expect a college then to kind of redo all of that for 450 quid. There has to be something where there is going to be some monetary injection, and we have to get the right people into FE to teach the skills that people want. If I want to be a plumber in Walsall, I can't do that at the moment because there isn't actually enough people that can teach plumbing because we can't pay them enough.
Which is just crazy, isn't it? When you think about the shortage.
Yeah, exactly.
But isn't that back to, though, if you have a skills system where increasingly actually from the top down, colleges are seen as just parts of the public sector, how do you, in that public sector mindset, say to a plumber who frankly is earning, what, on average £60,000, sometimes £70,000 a year, with these abolition of the IR35 rules, they might be able to squeeze a bit more money out of that in the future. How do you attract then that individual to come in, like you see actually in the Germanic systems in Germany and Switzerland, where you will have real industrial technicians who in effect, they're on secondment actually from their employers. Through the levy that the system they have, the wages get paid and backfilled that way, and then you can attract people who've got that practitioner.
Effectively, though, the FE colleges are not part of the public's.
In theory, they're not, but they're being treated like.
Exactly. But then all the benefits of being in the public system are not given to them as well. So they're doubly disadvantaged.
Toby, on this point, then, that Alan raises about colleges not being able to attract industry level people who are actually working today to come in and give a bit of their time and expertise to tomorrow's plumbers. They're not going to give up a job, are they, for £60,000, £70,000 a year if the public sector wages won't pay that?
Well, to an extent, the difference between the wages you get in the FE sector and the wages you get in industry is constant, has always been there. But what we have seen over the course of the last 12 years, that is accelerating, that gap growing because of the wage restraint that's been required in the colleges because of the underfunding of the further education sector. Now, there are different advantages to working for a college to taking your chances as an independent plumber, and so there's benefits within that. If the scale of the austerity and the impact on wages has tipped that balance and made it sort of unsustainable. I think it is interesting, the point that you raised with regard to the sort of approach they take in Germany, and I think that's something worth investigating. But I think a properly funded FE sector wouldn't solve all those problems, but it would actually address it to an extent. We've seen such a such a brain drain within the FE sector as more and more people have just found it's not sustainable to carry on working in it, and that's massively bad for our own competitiveness as a nation.
We've got to go for a break now, music break in fact. It's the One File Tune of the Week. Given that we're in Liverpool, we've chosen The Farm and All Together Now.
You're listening to the Skills World live radio show. Great music from the 80s, 90s and 2000s. Time now for the One File Tune of the Week.
Together now, in no man's land, together, all together now, all together now, all together now, in no man's land.
Welcome back to Skills World Live and the Great Skills Debate. Next week we'll be at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, but for now, with my panel guests, Toby, he said boo there, Toby Perkins MP, Katie Orr, Sonia Sodha and Alan Woods. We're debating what a future Labour government would do for skills, qualifications and FE. And in particular, in this second part of the radio podcast, we're going to look in more detail in how the FE skills and qualification system can actually respond to some of those big economic challenges that we've just been discussing. So we're going to probably do it in reverse order this time. We started with you, didn't we, last time, Toby? Alan, let's go to you next.
Okay, well, for me, in terms of, how does the system, I suppose, respond to the challenge, I think this issue for me is about putting individuals first, that let people make some of their own decisions and not have those decisions placed upon them. I think that in particular the adult skills, Toby picked it up in his opening remarks about, the adult skills system in this country is pretty bust. And we need to give adults the opportunity, not just those skills that are identified by combined authorities and employers, but allow people to actually get involved with skills, so that most people, if you spoke to them now about how would they get into college, they would probably want to do something which is about learning. Then skills development could come later, but let's give people the opportunity to do the courses that they want to do and fund those properly. I think we have to have value and trust in qualifications, and increasingly we're seeing qualifications being denigrated, whether they are new qualifications that have been developed, or we tend to have these debates, is a T-level better than an apprenticeship? Is that better than a level 2 qualification? We also don't have that as a complete system across the United Kingdom, so that we're now getting various qualifications withdrawn because of the demands being placed in other countries, and we've particularly got that within Wales and Scotland. I do think that we need to be funding more maths and English to enable some of those attainment gaps to be closed. I just don't think that £450 for functional skills is enough. And we've got to free up the system to respond. I think my opening statement was about trust in the system. Let's trust our colleges, let's trust our learning providers, let's trust the awarding bodies. We are close to all of this work. My organisation is celebrating 60 years. And some of our other colleagues in awarding organisations have been over 100 years in existence. And then we've got new colleagues in like Tiki UK who are also, delivering some fantastic services. Trust the system to deliver without having initiative-itis every 5 seconds that comes from politicians and bureaucrats. And I think we also need to have a careers advice and advisory service which actually provides good information, so that people can understand what the new careers are that are out there and available, and make those opportunities and really drive that aspiration so that people can get on with their lives, get a direct line of sight to a job, and have better skills which enable them to get better pay. And I think if we can get some of that back into the system, then people can learn and live. We talked about the Open University. That is the motto of the Open University. It is to learn and live. And I think that's where we've got to get to.
Okay, and just on the careers advice point, because actually Catherine put a question in about do we need to move to a system of careers advisors, that everybody should have access to a decent careers advisor. I think we all can tell those horror stories of our own careers advice journey that we may or may not have had at school, but it's amazing, isn't it? In my case, 30, 40 years on, we're still talking about that same issue, careers advice.
Yeah, absolutely, and we just need to get much better at it. And not just rely on the peer group of young people or people that have been out of the workforce to try and influence young people in some of those decisions, which invariably are adults that we're just not up to date with some of the opportunities that are available in the new world that we're all living in.
Katie, do you concur with Alan that we're locked at the moment, this is as a sector, as an education skills sector post-18, certainly in terms of further education and awarding organisations, in a very low trust model? Higher education has a relatively more autonomy, for example. The government can't dictate, for example, what courses can be funded. I mean, it's trying quite hard and has been through the Office for Students, but there is that ancient sort of sense, isn't there, of autonomy. Why are we not treated like grown-ups in the FE and skills system, do you think?
I think it's a really good question. I wish I knew the answer because I think we are grown-ups and we are well rehearsed in responding to challenge and responding to change, and we do it a lot quicker than the policymakers. And quite often we're having to adapt and adjust and project and predict what's going to happen 18 months, 2 years in advance, and we're trying to work with policies that are maybe a couple of steps behind us or are suddenly swapped or U-turned or changed. I completely agree that we're having a system, or we're moving towards a system that seems to want to channel individuals down particular routes, whether that's T-levels or apprenticeships or HDQs. We're seeing a reduction in choice. And I think what we need to be really careful about is confusing simplicity with quality. We're hearing all the time, the system is complicated, it's full of too many qualifications. What is too many qualifications? If they're being used, if people are finding value in them, why are there too many of them?
Well, I think what ministers will say is it's all a bit too confusing for them to understand there's too many
Exactly,
qualifications,
yeah.
and of course it might not align actually with their own educational experience. I mean, we've seen that with the likes of Nick Gibb and Michael Gove before then, the sort of view that we have to create a qualification system almost in the image of the educational experience that those particular people had.
Yeah.
So, anything a bit outside of that looks complex. Indeed, we had that with the Alison Wolfe review all those years ago. But Sonia, do you think there's almost a media aspect to this as well in terms of mainstream media? Because just as the Department for Education and policymakers often display a lack of trust, between those who work in skills and FE, papers like the Sunday Observer don't always run big stories, do they, about technical and vocational education? They obviously want to run stories for their readers about schools policy and what it means for early years and schools and the great university sort of debate, but you don't read a lot of stories. I mean, I shouldn't pick on your paper because I think it's a mainstream media point, but as a journalist and someone who's actually, to be fair, has showed quite a lot of interest in this sector, and you've appeared and been generous with your time and panels like this around FE. Do you, in terms of your colleagues in the Observer and the Guardian, do you detect that academic snobbery as well? Would we call it that?
I mean, I wouldn't say that about my own colleagues.
No.
I think, but I definitely think the media could be better. And I think that actually, just as politics suffers from being dominated by people who've been to university, so does the media and journalism. And it used to be more diverse, actually, because there was a big entry route into journalism through, direct learning on the job. That basically doesn't exist anymore. And pretty much everyone who comes in, I mean, there's a few places that operate very small apprenticeship schemes, but most people who come into journalism have, master's level qualifications in journalism, which does not make it very accessible. So there's definitely that bias and that bent. I guess the other thing I wanted to say, just to reflect on it, was, we've got, literally since I've been writing about education, there have been debates about parity of esteem between vocational and academic qualifications. And I think that you can't really reform one without the other. So a big part of the story, why there's no parity of esteem, is a social class issue. And if you're middle class and you can go to university, you go to university, and that is an entirely rational decision, because there are lots of jobs now that you cannot get without a university degree, even though actually maybe 30 years ago you could have done them with a university degree. Now, that's not to say it's a wrong decision to go to university, but I definitely think the vocational system will not improve until it is more socially mixed. And you're only going to be able to do that by reforming the university system at the same time. And there's got to be both a push and pull. So, I mean, I wrote quite a bit of a tongue-in-cheek suggestion in one column that said maybe we should put a middle-class cap on universities. That would be probably the fastest way to improve the quality of vocational education, to have a broader mix of social mix doing vocational education. And then all of a sudden, lots of middle-class parents will be really interested in vocational education, and some middle-class politicians might be too, because there's more of a chance their own kids might go into it. So, I mean, that was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do think we've got to think about that.
Yeah, and actually, there is a bit of seriousness behind that. There's evidence now with the reformed apprenticeship system in England that I think the Financial Times actually referred to it recently as the middle-class land grab of particularly degree apprenticeships, because actually what a lot of the so-called chattering classes potentially are seeing is the value in their offspring getting still a good degree from a recognised institution, but not leaving with, on average, £54,000 worth of debt, because it's a earn while you learn route. Toby, on this point about discrimination then in the labour market, because I think it is quite a fundamental point that Sonia raises, that we've got ourselves into this position as a country in terms of entrance increasingly to policing, to nursing, a whole range of public sector professions. You see it there in the job description. It says, must be a graduate, must have a degree or some... I mean, could a future Labour government actually outlaw that kind of discrimination by saying to employers, you know what, you've got to advertise for skill, not for institutional route? In other words, of course, you want in your policing and in your nursing and in these other professions, you want people who are competent, you want people who are skilled. But we have a language, don't we, around competency and skill and qualifications. We talk about the levels from level 1 right up to PhD, which is level 8. So it's probably fair enough seeing a job advert that says to be a nursing recruit or a trainee or a police officer on the beat, you've got to be at level 5, for example, as opposed to you've got to have a degree.
You see job adverts that say you must have a degree. It doesn't even specify what degree it needs to be. It just says graduates only.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, can a Labour government... because that doesn't cost any money, is it? That's about
I think
legislating
it's an
against
interesting
discrimination.
point. I mean, as somebody who left school at 17 and never went down the university route, probably one of the relatively few people in Parliament who didn't go to university, was in the old YTS scheme as a 17-year-old. I'm sort of very conscious of those sort of barriers that sometimes get put in the way. I think sort of whether you could outlaw it on the basis of making it sort of illegal. It might be very complicated. I mean, you know, you would sort of naturally expect a doctor to have studied medicine. That's not just even an unreasonable request. But if you know a journalist, you have to have done a journalism degree. I don't know. I mean, I think it would be an interesting thing to study. But I think that addressing that sort of institutional mindset, particularly within the public sector, that you know the sort of having been to university is the thing that guarantees that you have intelligence. I think that absolutely is a mindset that should be challenged. Yes.
Do you see a way through on that one in terms of levels of qualifications without, as you say, undermining the fact that these professions do need regulated and qualified people? I mean, you've got a background in qualifications, Katie. What's your sense of whether that's doable or not?
I think it is doable because, like you say, it doesn't cost any money. It's a sea change in how we think. At TQK, our job descriptions will never mention degrees. You don't need a degree to work at TQK, because I've had friends and family members experience barriers of that kind where they've been overlooked for promotions or jobs that have been taken by someone who has a degree in something that's not actually relevant to the job, but the barrier there was you must have a degree. And that to me is just absolute madness. You want the best person for the job, and university is not a guarantee of intelligence. I think we've all met people that would probably, testament to that. But
I mean, it's interesting again when you look at what's going on in North America. I mean, they talk about skills-based hiring increasingly, which is quite ironic for a country actually that sends more people to four-year grad college than we do. But it's just interesting how across the pond they're having that debate as well, that you kind of hire for talent, you hire for skill, not necessarily hire for the credential. I mean, both as an employer then, Alan, and as an awarding organisation, where do you sort of sit in that debate? Because in the end, you know, you want to be able to sell your credentials and your qualifications, and because you see the value in them.
Yeah, well, it's like Sonia said. I don't think we shouldn't get into a debate about that one is better than the other. We should be very much more about that, you know, there is an equal parity of esteem. You know, we shouldn't be saying that degrees are bad, vocational learning is good. We should be trying to encourage this concept that people can make some of these choices for themselves and to give those opportunities to everybody, so that whether you've got, you know, special needs or you might be, for example, a lot of our qualifications are in hairdressing, beauty therapy. They are particularly, you know, attractive to women learners. You know, making sure that women can actually enter into the workforce, learn a valuable skill, is a decision that the individual makes, not one which is actually dictated by government or by other bureaucrats. So I think we need to make sure that the learner is at the heart of the system and give them equal access to whatever route is going to advance them into a job or to give them better skills. And I think if we can make that the outcome of policy, I think we'll be in a much better place than where we are.
Okay, we've heard that several times. You make the learner the heart of the system. That's almost, it feels to me, your concluding remarks, which is why I'm going to move on then to Sonia to give us her sort of 30-second blast and concluding remark on this great skills debate we've had today.
Well, I guess the thing I would urge is, and I think we're particularly guilty of this in education, but also other policy areas, is sometimes just doing things and building on an existing system because it's the way we've always done things, rather than taking a step back and saying, why do we do that? Why do we have universities that are so academically selective? Why do we spend so much more on young people who go to university? So sometimes I think it's good to just take a step back and ask the big questions.
Yeah, big questions. 30 seconds to answer one of them then. Go over to you, Katie.
Following on from Alan's point, really, yes, give learners the authority to make a choice, but make sure that they have the breadth and quality of products to choose from. Don't narrow the playing field, improve the players.
Okay. Final word to the Shadow Further Education and Skills Minister, Toby.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. Thanks for this great debate. I think what we need is a much more strategic approach that recognises the role of skills within our industrial strategy and within the kind of economy that we want, that recognises that there's a nation we're being held back by the fact so many people aren't able to access the skills that they need, and particularly supports those people who aren't in the labour market to access the skills that they need, and for companies to be able to make those opportunities available to them also.
You're listening to the Skills World Live radio show with Tom Bewick.
That brings the first of our party conference Great Skills debate to a close, unfortunately. Just leaves me, though, to thank our brilliant guests, Toby Perkins, Katie Orr, Sonia Sodha, and, of course, Alan Woods. Big thanks also to the Skills World Live production team and our platinum partners at the Federation of Awarding Bodies who have kindly sponsored these important public debates. Next week, we'll be at the Conservative Conference in Birmingham, so don't forget to join us on Friday at 4 p.m. at fenews.co.uk. Goodbye.
Remember to subscribe to Skills World Live at fenews.co.uk or just download the show from any one of your favourite podcasting sites, including iTunes, Spotify and Spreaker. Your world, Skills World.